Okay, we're going to get going. Stragglers will straggle in as they do. Just a couple of quick things. Most of our presentations today are also available in French PowerPoints. If you would like a copy, just shoot me an email or Isabel an email. So Terry at fenestrationcanada.ca. Give me the name of which one you're looking for, and I'll forward it over to you. And then everybody with their cameras shooting images, I mean, absolutely feel free, but all of these sessions are recorded and will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel within a few days of the conference. So, you don't have to take pics. You can go and review the whole thing again later on. So I'd like to welcome Jacob Carter. He is with WDMA. He is the Director of Government Affairs, and he is going to tell us about per and poly-fluoroalkyls. Am I close?
Terry, that was fantastic.
All right, take it away.
Just for the usefulness and helpfulness for all of us here, I'm just going to refer to this as PFAS, but that was a great effort at the attempt to pronounce this. So first off, thank you everybody for having me today. My name is Jacob Carter. I am Director of Government Affairs for the Window and Door Manufacturers Association. We represent the fenestration industry in the United States and for North America. And I'm here to talk about the impact of PFAS regulations on the fenestration industry. Also, I just want to let it be known that I like to keep these things an open dialogue, a conversation. So if at any point, if you've got questions, comments, thoughts, raise your hand, I'll call on you. I'll also allow time at the very end for Q&A. So feel free to ask questions at any point. So first on our agenda, I'm just going to kind of go over what is PFAS. Why is PFAS gaining traction now? What are the U.S. state laws and regulations on PFAS? What is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency doing? So hence the federal government. What is Canada's approach on PFAS? And then we'll do Q&A. And again, if you've got questions or comments at any point, feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, I'll call on you. So what is PFAS? PFAS are man-made chemicals. They have a unique ability to repel oil, grease, water, and heat. PFAS was actually discovered in the 1940s by DuPont, their version of DuPont back then. These are widely used. There's thousands of different PFAS chemicals. They're used in everything from smudge characteristics on your phone to electronics. The most common example that I like to point out to is Teflon. Teflon was the very first consumer branded PFAS that hit the market. Super successful. We've all heard of Teflon. It's got this unique non-stick property that's used on non-stick pans. Heads up, don't use Teflon pans. That'd be my advice real quick here. There's been growing body of evidence that PFAS is associated with increases of rates of cancers, liver defects, birth defects. They're starting to notice that when they look at chemical manufacturing sites and where they actually produce PFAS, that the communities that live in those areas have increased incidence of cancer. Now, at this point, these are correlative, they're not causative. And they're still trying to figure out, who are the problem actors, what is causing what. There's not enough body of research or evidence yet to really establish the health links here. But there's enough evidence that is spooking governments from the EU to the US to Canada to different state governments and regulatory agencies. So just a quick kind of overview. PFAS is commonly used in fenestration products, but again, PFAS is used almost in everything. If you've got a cell phone, PFAS is in your cell phone. If you've got a laptop, PFAS is used in your laptop. There's almost no product in this room that does not have PFAS in some kind of form or sense. That's how ubiquitous this has become. Again, there's about 14,000 different types of PFAS. In the fenestration industry, they're commonly found in coatings and sealants that are really, really productive in blocking dust, sound, heat transmission, water repellents. They also use, again, to make glass surfaces more durable, to prevent soiling and grime, to make them easier to clean, to prevent smudge characteristics. Again, when you think about your cell phones, when you first got a touch phone back in 2006 or 7, when the iPhone first came out, there's really good technology now that when you use your touch phones, you don't see your fingerprints. That's a PFAS coating. I first had my first touch phone in 2006, it wasn't an iPhone, it was an Android, but it used to have smudges all over it. These are just kind of some things. It's commonly used in food packaging. If you drink a soda, you don't get aluminum metallic taste in your drinks. A lot of these have to do with these industrial kind of coatings that are used through the abilities of PFAS and things like that. So why is PFAS starting to get noticed and gain traction right now? Why is this becoming a big issue? Why is the U.S. hampering down on it? How did we get to this point today? Because it's certainly been an uptake in the last 5 years. I like to kind of relate PFAS to asbestos. Asbestos was a common product that was used for a number of decades. Then they figured out that there's a lot of health hazardous links to it. Then you started seeing all these lawsuits pop up of asbestos. Then you started to see ads from trial lawyers reaching out to consumers saying, hey, if you've got this blah, 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 XYZ cancer, and maybe it's asbestos, join our class action lawsuit. This is the same kind of trajectory that PFAS is taking. If you've not heard of PFAS before, trust me, you will constantly read about this. PFAS is also known as a forever chemical. So if you see articles or headlines or something like that, and they mention the term forever chemicals or toxic chemicals, look for the term forever chemicals. That's their kind of casual connotation for PFAS. So the thing about PFAS, again, is that PFAS is a forever chemical because of the way that they chemically bind, PFAS chemicals do not break down. They will be here thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Once you make a PFAS chemical, you cannot get rid of it. What does that mean? So they started to realize that PFAS is being found when they test water systems in municipalities and your drinking water. PFAS enters water waste systems through industrial charges, household products, and runoff, and they're found in sewage sludge. Now, sludge is like the mud-like material that remains after treatment of waste that flows into local sewage treatment plants. It's often used as fertilizer on farmland. So if you've got a sewage and sewage goes to a water treatment facility, basically they treat it, and what they have left over is they've got usable water that they send back out to be reused, but they also have something called biosolids, otherwise known as sludge. This biosolids is it's stabilized sludge. It's rich in nutrients or organic materials, and they figured out that this is really, really good fertilizer. So this biosludge, they've got tons and tons of it after they treat water from sewage plants. And they say, what do we do with the sludge? Well, it's amazing on farms. It helps crops grow. It's very productive. And so that's what they started doing with it. So over the last 3-4 decades, the practice of applying biosolids to farmland has become extremely widespread. They've actually been doing this for decades, but it's really increased in the last 20 to 30 years. Particularly in 1993, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued a regulation that was setting the standards for the disposal of biosolids that pretty much recommended using biosolids for farmers. So the thing about, like I said before, is that PFAS does not break down. So if PFAS finds its way into a water system, and then that water then goes to a treatment facility, and then they treat the water, well, the PFAS, they can't get rid of that. So where does it end up? At a certain point, it's not in your drinking water, but it's still in that biosludge. So when the EPA came with that rule out in 1993 and that recommendation, farmers all across the United States started using this very highly productive fertilizer sludge that contains PFAS in a lot of agricultural land across the country. In 2019, farmers in Maine started to realize when they did testing for water systems that their land was now testing high amounts of PFAS from the sludge that they were using decades prior and for decades. A lot of these farmers in Maine, their farmland became completely unusable. They had to go to the state. Crops couldn't grow on them. They figured out that dairy is a big product for produce in the state of Maine, that when they tested milk being delivered to consumers, milk had high amounts of PFAS. Suddenly, these farmers have no livelihood. They can't sell their milk. They can't grow crops. The government's basically banning all their products because they've got elevated levels of PFAS. This is where PFAS starts to get onto the radar of state lawmakers. So what's Maine's response to this? They see this problem. They see farms using PFAS. They see farmers now coming to the state saying, we are out of our jobs. We've got businesses. We can't hire people. They're looking for remediation. Maine now needs to say, we need to dedicate money, number one, as a reprieve, to treat these lands, to offer these farmers some sort of a trade-off here. And so what Maine did in 2021, they enacted the very first broad PFAS regulation ban in the United States. This is really important because it's going to be the trendsetter for the rest of the country. And the model and the framework that they use is now the model and the framework being used all across the country. Now, I'm going to go through what the first Maine law passed in 2021 is. I also want to make some kind of statements that this law has been amended twice significantly in the time being, which is also an important, again, because Maine's kind of trendsetting a lot of this for other states in the country. So in the very first version of this law, when they passed this in 2021, they basically went to every single manufacturer. It doesn't matter if you make windows, doors, skylights, fenestration products, building construction products, if you make cars, if you make boats, if you make apparel, clothing, no matter what it was. They wanted every single manufacturer to report to the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, that's our environmental protection regulatory agency, to say, hey, we want a complete documented list of where PFAS is in our state. We want the product it's in, we want to know how much PFAS is in it, we want to know the uses of PFAS is in it. Basically, they're building out a regulatory roadmap to say, we want an identified list of manufacturers, of their products, where PFAS is used in those products, so that eventually when we ban this, or when it is banned, that we can hamp down, we know where it's found. And we can go to XYZ manufacturer and say, we know you've got PFAS in this because we required you to report this to us. You reported to us. Now they can make sure that they're banning it years from now. So again, this first version of the Maine law, it required manufacturers within 2 years, beginning in 2023, to report all PFAS usage in their products to the Maine state government. And then it set out a complete blanket ban on any product that has PFAS beginning in 2030. To say, hey, it doesn't matter, I don't care what you're using PFAS for, unless it's to save lives, it's got to be banned. Now, there's a certain amount of product categories that PFAS might have an exemption for. The kind of low-hanging fruit in this area would be medical devices. You know, if you're having surgery or something like that, and you have medical liner bags that, that are having IV fluids going into your body, those have really important PFAS characteristics that are coded on those bags. So those get exempted. The other kind of easy example is fire retardant foams. PFAS, they have no alternative that if a fire breaks out with jet fuel on an aviation airbase or something like that, there's nothing besides PFAS that can extinguish a fire with jet fuel. So again, this was the first iteration. Immediate reporting requirements for manufacturers of all products, and then an eventual ban beginning in 2030. This law grabbed attention all across the country. It received massive pushback from the industry. You had everyone from, fenestration industry representatives, automobile manufacturers. LL Bean's a big apparel company in the state of Maine. Every manufacturer is going to the state to say, this is ludicrous. We've got 2 years to figure out where PFAS is. When you ask a company at that point what PFAS is, most companies don't even know what PFAS is. Suddenly they're having to do a deep dive into their regulatory folks, into their technical advisors. They're having to go and do expansive inquiries into their supply chains to figure out, who's supplying what components. Do those components have PFAS? So now they're going to their component suppliers, and those component suppliers are now like, wait, what was PFAS? It's the same conversations going on in every single industry. So basically, the state of Maine was having all these issues. The regulatory agency received this law from the state lawmakers. This was almost an impossible task to implement for the state of Maine. The state of Maine is a small state. It's not a big state. They don't have a lot of resources necessarily. So in June of 2023, they passed an amendment to this law. They said, okay, that 2023 reporting requirement, we're going to kick it down to 2025. We exempted manufacturers that employ less than 25 people, so small manufacturers, from having to report. And we can change the way that information on PFAS is reported. Recently, just a few months ago in April, they significantly amended this again. And again, this is really important because what we hope plays out in Maine when they're course correcting this kind of draconian regulation on PFAS, that this can play out in other states too. So in the last 2 months, they came back to the state, that they passed a new law amending it, and they said that total product ban that bans all products in 2030, we're going to delay that to 2032. And then all the reporting requirements for manufacturers that were supposed to be 2023, then got kicked down to 2025. You no longer have to report anything in Maine now, unless you get an exemption from that 2032 ban. So heading into 2032, if the state of Maine gives your product exemption, then you have to report the usage of PFAS in the products. Then you have to report why the PFAS is being used and the amounts of PFAS being used. It's a little bit more reasonable, practical, and approachable for companies. So this is what's happening in Maine. But again, the Maine framework, the very initial framework that was adopted, the first go around on this law, this was the framework being adopted by all states now. And they're using this as a model. This is particularly prevalent in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is also home to 3M Manufacturing, one of the largest chemical manufacturers of PFAS, so that's an important kind of tidbit here. So in 2023, that's 2 years after the state of Maine, the state of Minnesota then takes the exact law that Maine passed, almost identical to the verbatim to the text, and passed almost exactly the same thing, albeit with a few dates changes. So in the state of Minnesota, beginning in 2025, immediately, or in 2025 rather, any products such as carpets and rugs, cleaning products, cookware, cosmetics, dental floss, fabric treatments, juvenile products, menstruation products, textile furnishings, ski racks, upholstered furniture, all banned if they've got PFAS. Not allowed to sell it anymore, beginning in 2025. Beginning in 2026, manufacturers of products with PFAS are still required to report these reporting requirements to the state of Minnesota, particularly their pollution control agency, the PCA. That's their environmental regulatory agency for the state. So while the state of Maine said, okay, it's a little bit unreasonable to have manufacturers figure out where PFAS is and report it in a timely sense, the state of Minnesota still has this in the books now because they passed this in 2023 and they have not significantly amended it yet. So beginning 2026, manufacturers in Minnesota, again, have to report all this information to the state. They're having to do these wild go-around exercises, making sure that they're educating internally people at their company, that they're reaching out to their suppliers, and they're figuring out where PFAS is. Just to be kind of frank too, there's not enough PFAS testing capacity in the US to kind of handle all these requests. So if you've got a blanket ban on all these products or all these manufacturers having to figure out where PFAS is, and you've got the component suppliers having to figure out where PFAS is, there's not enough certified laboratories in the United States to actually be able to test products that are coming into them. There's a massive pipeline of all these products. This is kind of a heads up too, if you're doing an internal inquiry about where PFAS might be in your products, start now, don't start later. There's a massive pipeline, there's a massive backlog. Other manufacturers are already kind of racing towards to try to figure this out and educate themselves. So time is key. But again, beginning 2032 in Minnesota, any product with PFAS is banned unless it receives that exemption. So again, 3M, really big presence, headquartered in Minnesota, one of the largest chemical manufacturers. They've been producing PFAS. They have billions and billions and billions of dollars off PFAS. It's a massive profit booster, revenue driver for the company. Recently, they acknowledged that with all the litigation and lawsuits, with the public associations and the health concerns around PFAS, they recently announced a year ago that they're exiting all PFAS manufacturing beginning in 2025, or by the end of 2025, rather. So beginning 2026, they will cease all production of anything related to PFAS. This is going to affect about 25,000 different products. This is to say that even if you've got PFAS in your products, and maybe you're not selling them in the state of Minnesota or the state of Maine or other states that are regulating this, does not mean that you're going to have access and availability to current products that have PFAS, because these products might not be available in a few years due to these regulations. Now, 3M is currently facing thousands of lawsuits over PFAS contamination. In 2023, they agreed to a settlement to pay $10 billion to local municipality wastewater treatment facilities to address this issue because they're being blamed with this. In 2018, they agreed to pay almost $1 billion to settle with the state of Minnesota. And then Minnesota estimates it's going to cost anywhere between 14 and 20 billion to remove PFAS from wastewater streams in the state. That's a massive amount of money. That's just for one state in Minnesota. If you kind of extrapolate that from California to all the other bigger states, you see this big problem that states are trying to tackle with, where they're realizing that the cost of having to remove PFAS and treat it safely and to kind of isolate it from the water systems is costly, and they're looking for people to blame. They're looking to put to either cease to stop it, or to sue manufacturers to make them stop it, or to get people to stop using PFAS for that reason. Again, this is not just for 3M. This is affecting other chemical companies, Chemours, DuPont, Corteva. 3M also settled about 600 million euro lawsuit in Belgium for the EU because they found that they had a facility in Antwerp that was also causing cancer for all the residents that lived around it. So what does PFAS bans look like in the United States right now? At this point, right here, we've got these, Maine and Minnesota are the two states that have these broad blanket bans on PFAS products to say it doesn't matter what product it is, unless you have an exemption, it's banned beginning in 2032. They both have that 2032 date. That's about 7.5 years out. It's not that far along. It's coming. Problematically, though, as I said, is Maine passed its first law in 2021. Minnesota followed suit in 2023. Now you're seeing a large amount of states all introducing similar pieces of legislation. The state of California recently just tried to do exactly the same thing that Minnesota and Maine previously did. Unfortunately, there's industry pushback that was able to at least temporarily stall that. That's not moving forward for now, but there is a piece of legislation in the California state government that's trying to ban all PFAS, and that does have wide support. Similar laws been enacted and pushed for in Colorado. In Colorado, they've tried to do a broad blanket PFAS ban, also with reporting requirements, and to also kind of ban those immediate product categories such as textiles and stuff like that right away. Now, Colorado introduced the same law that Maine and Minnesota had over the course of 3 months. A lot of industry pushback and coalition advocacy. They neutered that law basically, and Colorado did end up passing a PFAS law, but they don't require manufacturers reporting information. There's no broad blanket ban on all products. And instead, it's just a kind of limited product category ban to say, okay, these 12 products, textiles, clothing, cosmetics, makeup, kids' toys, juvenile products, things like that. Those are the problem actors, at least right now. So those are immediately banned. So this is what you're going to see happen all over the country. You're going to see these blanket bans being proposed. And in some states, they may pass, and they've got a lot of fruition, or they've got legislators that are more progressive, environmentally focused, who are likely to pass those or to do actions on those. But you're going to see industry pushing back to say, wait a minute, look at the state of Maine. The Maine did this in 2021. They had problems with it. They had to amend it twice. They're still having problems with it. It's a massive hurdle on implementation efforts. Slow the horses here. Don't ban the products right away. Let's start with the first piecemeal kind of approach. Let's just ban the problem actors, the category products I just mentioned. That was successful in Colorado. You're seeing this effort play out in other states. Michigan just introduced a copycat legislation for Minnesota and Maine. Washington's pushing through similar efforts. States like Rhode Island, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina have all introduced similar legislation on PFAS bans. So what you're also seeing happening is that if you follow American politics right now, we've got divided government in the US. You've got the White House controlled by Democrats, and you've got Congress, it's a bicameral legislature. So you've got the US Senate, which is the upper chamber, currently controlled by Democrats, and you've got the lower chamber, the US House of Representatives, currently controlled by Democrats. What does that mean for federal laws and regulations? It means nothing gets passed in the law sense. It's just a division of party power. So what happens when the federal government is slow to move on laws? States take the lead then. Then states move. And states move way quicker than the federal government does. The federal government in the US might take years and years and years to develop some of these kind of guidelines and proposals, and they might die still in the Senate or the House of Representatives. In these states, like Minnesota, Maine, and then all the other kind of suspect actors, these laws get introduced and passed within 1 to 3 months. So literally nothing on the books. The law gets introduced, it gets sped through, gets appropriated through the committee process, and it goes right to the governor. And within 3 months, there's nothing being talked about. Suddenly it's introduced and it's enacted. A lot of this is to go, if you're a politician and you're running for office, you're looking for things to say, here's what I did in office, And the PFAS kind of argument for them when they're having environmental and health advocates go to them, sometimes they say, oh, I can go to my constituents and say, I'm doing something that's good for the environment. I'm doing something that's good for public health concerns and causes. They're not hearing the other side of the argument to say, wait, maybe PFAS is, cancerous, or maybe there are health associations with it, but there's 15,000 types of PFAS chemicals. They're using all sorts of ways in different products. But again, these governments are kind of trying to say, well, it doesn't matter where PFAS is used. If it's being able to be washed down the sink, or you use it in a product and you throw that in the toilet, or you throw out something, your couch, and it goes to a treatment facility, at some point it's going to get into the water system, and if chemicals do not break down, they're forever chemicals. Therefore, the long-term solution is just get rid of them and to find alternatives. Are there any questions about state action, about anything I've covered so far? Any comments, any questions at this point? Yes.
That's okay. I was starting to nod off there. Yeah.
12 minutes ago, I didn't even know what PFAS is, but now I understand it. Is there any efforts in better collection of PFAS chemicals from water treatment? Like everything seems to be centered around banning the use of them entirely, but is there potential to be able to collect them at the water treatment facility and, I don't know, reuse them or?
Well, I mean, that's what's currently happening in a certain sense, with the biosludge and the mass. But what do they do from that point, right? So what they can do is that they identify that they've got this sludge that's used with PFAS, and that's what they've got out of the water treatment facility at that stage, right? One of the problems is that, okay, Maine's also act on this because they've started testing their farmland. They've started testing their soil and they're finding the PFAS there. Other states have not done this testing yet. There's a lot of states, Oklahoma, Texas, any states have not tested yet on a wide scale sense. That's, government funded and things like that. If they were to test, they would definitely find PFAS in that. And that would spook them. And you might see a rush of action at that. To go back to your question though, is there ways to collect them? They're figuring out stuff. So there's ways that they can isolate them, but again, they're still out there. They're still there's no way to get rid of them per se. So they got to put them into a land fill somewhere like that. What they are trying to develop right now is high level techniques to dissolve the chemical itself. None of these have been proven yet to be effective or cost effective. For instance, there's technologies out there or theories of technologies out there that if you apply a high concentration of heat to these PFAS chemicals, what you just said, maybe we could isolate them, get them out of the water treatment facility, and then we can zap them with these high kind of heat concentration, and that might dissolve them, the chemical bind there. If you saw, if you're a chemist or you speak to chemists, what chemists found when they started messing with PFAS and they started testing with PFAS chemicals back in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, it was to them, it was amazing what they were doing. This also could be viewed as highly irresponsible because they knew what they were doing. They knew that that they saw this chemical reaction that formed this bond that could never be formed before, and they could not figure. Once they formed it, they could not get rid of that bond. They just could not figure that out. And they're right now trying to figure out ways to do that. They have not found anything that's remotely, again, cost-effective, feasible, widespread use. And again, there's not a lot of money being dedicated towards testing these facilities. So you're seeing a lot of states starting to introduce laws to say, okay, maybe we're not banning PFAS, but we want to allocate or appropriate $500 million to do the testing, to figure out where PFAS is. You're also seeing enhanced efforts about data collection. Right now, there's a lot of government regulatory officials that don't know where to look for PFAS, don't know, again, if there's 1,500 or 15,000 PFAS chemicals, which ones are causing cancers, which ones are not causing cancers, which ones are the problem actors where they lead into the water facilities. They don't know the answers to a lot of this stuff. They're way behind the curve on this. So a lot of this, when these laws are being passed, are reactionary. They're not necessarily fueled by data or science, but they're emotional. For instance, the law in Minnesota that was passed has been termed Amara's law. Amara was this girl, she's about 13 or 14. She grew up around the 3M chemical manufacturing site. She developed leukemia. They had her go to the state legislature in Minnesota when this law was being introduced in the first few weeks. And they had her testify and said, I'm going to die. I've got a terminal diagnosis. I'll be done in 6 months, which she wasn't lying. That was true. And she said, I directly attributed to the PFAS. So you've got this very emotional connection to the idea of PFAS. And so, for instance, in Minnesota, that one aspect right there, you're going to have a lot of lawmakers not want to roll back any of those things because they think about that. So what needs to happen? Do you have another question?
Yeah, 20 years ago, Greenpeace was on this big push to ban chlorine
Uh-huh.
in all compounds until they realized that the safest way to deliver water to households was through PVC pipes.
Yeah.
And the alternative was significantly worse. And as a result, like architects were trying to specify non-PVC based building materials, and the lead green building programs were rewarding buildings for using non-PVC based substances. And then we branded UPVC. So unplasticized PVC was the way of getting around that in a way, but it fizzled out because the consequence of eliminating it was bigger than keeping it. And the emotion that you mentioned, that the emotion tied to the concept, if we pick one stream to get, and that's the justification to delete, but are we paying it? What's the consequence if we get rid of it? Is there an alternative? Like, what if it's a medical equipment that's resulted in us living another 20 years?
I mean, that's a fantastic question. And that's exactly the type of responses that we are, the kind of talking points that we're constantly kind of delivering to lawmakers, to regulators, to say, listen, PFAS was developed as an alternative to other things. If you're looking for us to get alternatives to PFAS, who's to know that doesn't create something that is more detrimental to society? Maybe if we don't know what PFAS is now, maybe there's some other chemical, field of chemical science out there that we don't know about either. But they say that, here's an alternative. It's not PFAS. It didn't have that moniker to it. People don't know about it. We don't know if it does anything bad. They didn't know if PFAS did anything bad 60 years ago. Here's an alternative. Your law bans this. We're going to use this alternative. that's a very, very reasonable concern. We don't know if, if they're asking manufacturers to find reasonable alternatives, what do those reasonable alternatives look like? What's the regulatory process there? What's the data on the science there? That's a very good, that's something that we're actively thinking about. Yes.
Is this on? There it is. To Anton's point, a lot of this is going to come down, but there's going to be the push and shove between banning it and then the manufacturers say, look, we have no alternative but to use these things if you want the products, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like technologically there is an alternative,
Yeah.
really, at least not now, or maybe not forever, because this is a matter of chemical reactions. So what all this comes down to is the quality of the science around the health impacts of this, right? And we've seen the hysteria in some cases, and then we've seen, I don't know, things like the ozone layer that were actually real, right? So I want to circle back. You mentioned correlations, but they're not hard to say on the cancer thing, and exactly which PFAS are you talking about. What is the state of the science on the health really? Because everybody in here has to evaluate whether this is a trend hysteria thing that is working performatively for some politicians right now and will eventually go away, or whether this is actually a thing, right? And you're going to have to learn how to make your products without PFAS in them, which I don't know.
So the big problem here is that the data is incomplete and there's no really good solution to get that data. So they brought up this point, particularly at one of the committee hearings in Minnesota, I think it was, when they were talking about this law. And they said exactly what you just kind of brought up, how can they figure out the kind of health effects? Where's the data science? And again, the data and the science is not necessarily there. They do have correlative maps. And they do have these maps where you can see, instances of cancer. And the closer you get to a chemical manufacturing plant that's got PFAS, they find it there. There's been incidences of, them finding PFAS being, back in the 70s and 80s, where they found a land in West Virginia where they dumped a bunch of PFAS chemicals, and suddenly you can see the correlative cancer and leukemia rates increasing right there. Again, this is correlative though. But when they were bringing up this point, testifying about this on the committee level in Minnesota, particularly, and they brought up that exact point. What the health advocate and the environmentalist advocate who's advocating for banning PFAS altogether, what she said and her point is like PFAS is like smoking. If you smoke cigarettes for a year, we can't say, aha, look, you got lung cancer. But over the course of 60 years, you will develop lung cancer. We can get data that shows that lung cancer is prevalent, and not just on a correlative sense, but on a causation sense. But she was kind of putting out the point that to say, hey, we're not going to have the data about the long-term effects about PFAS for 60 years, maybe not even next. It's just a long, slow process. The fact of the matter is, too, is that if we test anyone's blood here, it'll come up with PFAS, elevated levels of PFAS. In fact, if you test 99.99999% of people in the entire world, doesn't matter if you're in the US, doesn't matter if you're in Cambodia or Venezuela, doesn't matter if you're in Alaska or Antarctica, they have PFAS in their blood. This is a new thing. This is not, if you did the same test 100 years ago, no one's got PFAS in their blood. So to kind of sit there and say, well, we see, PFAS is in people's bloods. PFAS is, a correlation when it's being produced. We see cancer rates increasing. Again, correlation. There might be other causes there. There's a lot of new things that we have in society that weren't around 100 years ago. PFAS is one of them. But the environmental and the health advocates are making the point to say, we can't sit here and prove to you that PFAS causes something bad within a year or 5 years. This is going to take decades and decades and decades of data collection, of analyzation, of evaluation. And for now, the safest thing to do is to ban it. And if we can get data to say that it's not as hazardous as we thought, then unban it. I'm not saying that's the right approach, but that's the approach that they're kind of advocating for and making points on. Other questions? Okay, so I will turn to what the federal government is doing in the United States. Because right now I just talked about how, in the US Congress, in the White House, there's a division of power. So they're not passing new laws on PFAS. But there is US Environmental Protection Agency, which is, under the control of the White House. They've got this massive kind of, undertaking where they're trying to evaluate PFAS. They're taking a much more reasonable approach But basically what the US EPA did last year is they announced a final regulatory rule that says we are looking to analyze and get data collection on PFAS, where it's coming in. We don't know what the problem actors are. We don't know which PFAS is bad, but we need to start somewhere. So we just need collection, and we need manufacturers to tell us where their PFAS is, what kind of PFAS they have. But the US EPA is taking a much different approach for this. So again, in October 23, EPA issued a rule that basically said for any US manufacturer, you have to submit information to us from any point from January 1st, 2011 to December 31st, 2022. If you've manufactured PFAS, you have to tell us you've manufactured it. So for most of the folks in this room, that won't matter at all. We're not DuPont, we're not 3M. So at first glance at this law in the US, you wouldn't think, okay, you don't have to report anything. But if you've imported any components, articles, any materials that contain PFAS, doesn't matter if you didn't produce PFAS. If you're a US manufacturer, you've imported any components that have PFAS, you need to tell the EPA about that. You need to report that to the EPA. So they're going to open up an online portal beginning later this year, November 12th, until May 8th of 2025. So they're going to have about 6 or 7 months there. And they're going to ask all manufacturers in the US, again, to conduct massive inquiries internally to figure out, any products that you've imported, to make sure that if they've got PFAS, you have to let the EPA know about that. So for the folks in this room, if you deal with any US manufacturers, if you're supplying component parts to US manufacturers, if you've got any kind of relationship there where you're trading off materials, you should be expecting at some point, if not already, that these US companies might reach out to you and say, hey, we need kind of statements of certifications to say, we purchased this materials from you. If they've got PFAS in them, we need to know about it because we need to tell the US EPA about it. This is a one-time reporting requirement. EPA is not banning anything yet. They're also not, instituting any fines or anything like that. They're trying to be practical about this. They're trying to say, listen, we don't have a good snapshot of, how much PFAS is even in the country. We want to know how much PFAS is in the country and exactly what type of PFAS it is. They don't want duplicative reports. So, for instance, look at my next one. So for instance, if you're a manufacturer in the US, if you're the importer of record for components from Canada, you need to report that information to the US. If you've bought components from a domestic supplier or distributor, and they've purchased those components from somewhere else, the distributor needs to report that information. What they're trying to avoid is that they don't want two different companies reporting the same exact presence of PFAS. What they're hoping to get is to get by volume, by metric weight, to say, okay, of the 15,000 chemicals of PFAS, the large bulk are these, or here are the statistics breaking down, and then they can kind of figure out from there how to regulate it, how to, either ban a few of them, ban all of them, whatever they do with that data collection is still premature to say, but they're trying to get the data to say, we don't have enough information, we need the information to do this. So again, if you deal with any kind of US manufacturers on this, if they've imported stuff from you and they're in the import of record, expect them to be reaching out to you at some point. Let me make a point, the US EPA is not trying to find companies, they're not trying to do any aha gotchas or anything like that. But like in Minnesota or Maine.
Jacob.
Yes.
Question.
Yes.
Right here.
Go for it, Terry.
So talking about having to report for imported components, let's say I'm a window manufacturer sending product into the US to the end user, potentially. Does that have to be reported somehow? Like, do I need to be able to provide levels of PFAS in my completed products that are being shipped to the end user in the US?
So in that exact scenario, you should not have to do that. US EPA rule does not have language clarifying that. But if you sold it to any company in the US, they're going to have to reach out to you, and they're going to have to get that on record.
Sorry, if that product went to your dealer in the US and then he distributed to the end user, that dealer would then potentially be looking to you as the importer to provide PFAS.
Precisely. So in that exact scenario right there, the distributor is going to have to report this information to the EPA, which means the distributor is going to go to your company, your manufacturer, whatever you sell, and they're going to make these requests and say, we have these reporting obligations to the federal government now. They're looking for ways, they're looking for information. You should be getting these inquiries at some point. Yes. So in the states of like Maine and Minnesota, for instance, where they've got these product bans and they've got these reporting requirements, say like for instance in Minnesota in 2026, you're not allowed to sell anything unless you've reported the usage of PFAS. It's not a ban, but it's a reporting requirement. So, okay, well, how do they enforce that? Well, if they catch you not reporting your information and still selling your products, they can have the Attorney General of the Minnesota state government sue your company, launch public investigations into your company. They've got fines structure that need to be set up still. But theoretically, environmental groups, they could go to the Attorney General's office for any state or any province, and they could say, we believe that this company has PFAS in their products. We go to the public database. We don't see them reporting information about PFAS in their products. They're probably, cheating on this. Let's get them. Brad, do you have a question?
Yeah, Jacob,
Yeah.
obviously they're asking for imported, but importing, reporting an imported product is only a small subset, right? Of the product that's being sold every day in the United States.
Yeah.
So what was their logic to that? Was it just more of to get the pipeline flowing a little bit?
So I guess
Before they asked the proverbial question of what are you selling today? What have you been selling for the last 10 years from 2011 to 2000?
mind you, these would be like imported products, right? Components. But the large bulk of this data is going to be from the chemical manufacturer saying, here's the amount of PFAS we made this year. Here's the volume, not this year, but from the 2011 to the 2022 kind of that date capture. I would expect the bulk of that to come from them. And then for any imported component materials to kind of fill in the gaps there. Does that answer your question?
I guess I'm just assuming that the last manufacturer like Marvin.
Yeah.
Go back 10 years and say how much product did we sell across the United States?
Only if you've imported that product, not if you just sold it.
I get that, but it just seems like they're just asking for a small subset of the imported data. That's just getting at a little bit. That's what I'm wondering about.
It's a monumental task that they've got. I can't offer any insights to their thinking, their approach about it. They're looking to have a data subset of something. Whether that data subset is accurate, they're trying to get it as accurate as possible, I would say. But again, they're trying to be friendly and reasonable about this. Part of the problem is that this is 11 years or 12 years worth of records. Most companies don't have 12 years worth of records. I think U.S. Customs only recommends you keeping records of imported materials for 5 years, for instance. But again, the EPA is flexible on this. I said, listen, if you've got the information and you have the information, tell us about it. Make a few inquiries, make calls, make emails. Just do the due diligence. But if you don't know, you don't have to test. You don't have to report to us. But if you do test and you do know this, you've got this internal information, let us know about it. If you don't have that information, you don't have to go to the ends of earth to figure out where the PFAS is or who you've sold it to. They're trying to be reasonable about this, and they're not trying to be punitive about this. They're not trying to be attacking or aggressive about it. Do you have a follow-up to that? I'm not. Are you sure? Okay. Yes.
Okay, well sorry. Yeah, that kind of kills my question. I didn't know it was voluntary. Like
Well,
this
it's not necessarily voluntary, but they're saying if you don't have access to the information, then tell us that, and that will suffice.
So they're not going to say you can't import this product because
they're not. This is not a ban.
it's not anything like that.
It's just data collection.
Because there's people in this room that export product to the United States, and I was wondering if anybody had their dealers have to present this information.
Yeah.
But you know what? If it's voluntary, the answer is no.
Yeah. But this is the first step in the U.S. government. Once they've got this information, then Congress can start to act on things like this, and that's the troubling next step. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So again, EPA, they're doing this massive data collection. They're gonna have an online portal open up for about a period of 6 months. Honestly, it feels like a lot of U.S. manufacturers are not aware or privy to this. PFAS, for whatever reason, has not entered the radar for a lot of companies. You might have a rush of companies figuring this out and realizing, wait, this applies to us. When you read the first kind of ruling of the EPA, you might mistakenly assume this applies to chemical manufacturers and not anybody importing materials into the U.S. That is erroneous. But a lot of these folks don't have regulatory people on hand or people who are just paying attention to the issue of PFAS in general. But this is something that every single industry is having a rude awakening about. Again, if you don't know PFAS now, the fact that we're having this conversation today, I promise you in the next 2 weeks, you will see an article somewhere that references PFAS, that references forever chemicals. When you start seeing headlines that says toxic chemicals, click on it. 9 out of 10 times it's going to be referring to PFAS, and you'll see it. It'll call PFOS, PFAS, PFAA, some of the subdivisions of PFAS chemicals. But it's starting to enter the public consciousness in an entirely different way. And we've been following this issue for a few years now. Now you're suddenly starting to see it on CNN and Fox News, and you're starting to see it on these large media broadcasts where these, to a certain extent, these are kind of very nuanced chemical kind of, information that's not, been reported to the public or not being discussed publicly on a national sense. That's changing rapidly. That's no longer the case. Now you're seeing a lot of, public officials, regulators, environmental activists, health advocates across the U.S. really, really picking this up in the dialogue and the conversation and public consciousness. So this is going to be a pertinent issue. Again, from 2021, when Maine first passed that bill, we're only 3 years ahead of that, and we already have Minnesota copying that ban. We've got massive amounts of other states trying to implement the same types of bans, and maybe they're not successful this year, but they're going to go at it again. They're going to try next year. They're going to try the year after that. It's likely that in the next few years that a number of these states will have PFAS banned as product bans, as a complete blanket bans. So it doesn't matter what product it is, unless it's a life-saving medical device or fire retardant that's used on an airbase, it's going to be banned. However, we are seeing, the hopeful thing is that you see this kind of ebb and flow. You see the first kind of overreaction to say, aha, PFAS is a problem, let's ban it. That's what Maine did. Then you see, when you start to implement those requirements onto manufacturers and you try to figure out how do we actually make this effective? How do we enforce it? How do we put this into practice? You see them rolling it back. Like, wait a minute, this is way harder than we thought. This is way more expansive than we thought. It's way more invasive. We're asking manufacturers a lot. We might be killing industry, business, and commerce in the state of Maine. And they start to roll it back and say, okay, let's get rid of the reporting requirements. Okay, the 2030 ban, maybe that was a little bit ambitious. Let's push it back to 2032. Hopefully these arguments will start to be made, is that you'll see a lot of states do what Maine did, and then this larger conversation appear where they start to delay the bans, they start to get rid of the reporting requirements, and they start to kind of reasonably look to say, hey, where's the data? We need more data on this. And hopefully what does happen is that over the next 10, 20, 30 years, where the process takes, is that we'll get good data to say, you know what, 15,000 PFAS chemicals, these 100 are the real ones that are causing issues. These are not used in fenestration products. These are not used in building products. I'm speaking speculatively here, so do not hold me to that last statement. But hopefully that's where this goes down to, is that we can identify these are the ones causing cancer. These are the ones that we can get rid of that are being used in cosmetics. When you have lipstick that doesn't smear or smudge off, that's PFAS. When you've got any coat, if you've got Gore-Tex, that's PFAS. If you've got a water rain repellent jacket and the water slips off, that's PFAS. If you've got a rug and you spill coffee on it and just wipes off, that's PFAS. Some of these things might be much more immediately apparent. Again, they need the data on that, they need the science on that. And hopefully you start to see these broad carved out exemptions for broad categories of PFAS chemicals and industry products that are not the problem actors. And hopefully that's the way that the evolution of the conversation goes. So in Canada, if you're paying attention in Canada, this is starting to pick up in Canada. Health Canada has been, in the Trudeau administration, has been a large promulgation of environmental and health kind of focused policies. In 2016, the Canadian government banned a large portion of PFAS chemicals from being either produced or sold to consumers, with some notable exemptions about PFA, PFOS. That are still used in a lot of products in Canada. Recently, last year, Health Canada and the Environment and Climate Change Canada published a big PFAS report that was years in the making, that was mandated to them by the Canadian government. And in that report last year, they recommended to say, listen, we should reclassify all PFAS chemicals as toxic. And this is directly related to Canadian efforts to reduce PFAS presence in drinking water systems. Now, that has not gone into effect yet. That's a regulation that's been recommended. If that did go into effect, if they kind of came out with a report that said, okay, we're implementing that, that we could then see either Canadians, provinces, or the entire national government banning PFAS altogether, or in limited circumstances, or doing reporting requirements, or doing similar structures that the state of Maine is doing and the state of Minnesota is doing. A final report's expected to be out this year with those kind of recommendations. of whether they're going to actually implement those type of things. But this is on the radar of the Canadian government. They're starting to really hammer down on this. The Trudeau administration is a little bit more activistic about these type of things. And there's a realistic, possibility that with the report that could come out with later this year has immediate ramifications for the members here in this room. With that, are there any other questions, comments? This is an evolving issue. So, this is, again, something that we are actively at WDMA and also working with our partners at FenCan, trying to address, trying to monitor, trying to stay on top of. It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole in the US right now, because every time you kill a bill in a certain state, like whether it's Colorado or California, a new bill pops up in Michigan or Wisconsin or different states. It's just an onslaught of these bills coming out. And a lot of them do have legs. And again, if they don't pass this year, they'll pass. They'll have a realistic chance of passing within the next few years. Are there any questions, comments, anything that anyone has? Yes. Nope, sorry.
Hang on. Oh, you need to wait.
How do manufacturers test their products?
That's a fantastic question. That's a fantastic question.
You get the prize.
So the first thing I would do is recommend is look for consultants that have chemical regulatory expertise. If you don't have one in-house already, start examining prospects to potentially hire someone to take care of those regulatory requirements for you. Number two, do a complete survey of your component suppliers of any products that you buy from other people. Reach out to them. Have your legal counsel reach out to them. Say, listen, we're concerned about the presence of PFAS in components. We recognize that there are national trends and international trends that are regulating and trying to limit the use of PFAS. We are doing an awareness kind of, an internal investigation of our own usage of PFAS. Could you please let us know if you've got PFAS? If you don't know if you've got PFAS, let us know that too. I would highly recommend, and this is not a simple process. You might send that inquiry out to a company or a supplier, and don't expect a response in a week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks or even a month or 2 months or 4 months. It might take them a long time. And they're probably getting these inquiries from a lot of different companies, which may be helpful or may not be helpful. But start doing these investigations internally, start bringing these topics up internally. If people at a higher decision level making process in your company don't know about PFAS, make sure that somebody does. And then look into having chemical regulatory compliance experts who are having a field day with this issue, to be very honest. Look to have somebody to consult with somebody to put someone on a retainer that will cover your liabilities on this issue. But again, do internal investigations, reach out to all your suppliers, appoint someone within your companies to reach out to all your suppliers, start the process now, and let other companies know that you're doing this. Question over here?
Yes. So my question about 40 minutes ago when we initially heard about PFAS was, wouldn't an MSDS sheet or an SDS sheet show that? But now you've mentioned there's probably like 1,500 variants of it, but would those variants not have to be listed in like a material safety data sheet?
I don't believe they would be.
Okay.
I'm not an expert in those type of sheets and information that they offer. When I've taken a look at the type of similar materials, you do not see PFAS anywhere. There's, again, when I say 15,000, there's literally 15,000. I had to go searching. There's an Excel sheet that's got this all listed out by the chemical abstracts registry number. That's got the actual chemical names for each one. Teflon's known as Teflon, but in a chemical sense, it's this elongated name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce right now. But most people don't know where PFAS is in their products. Most compliance and component suppliers, they haven't been mandated to report PFAS on these sheets yet, so they have no reason to have done this yet. This is, again, a very new conversation happening in policy making circles, in regulatory making circles. It was not happening 10 years ago. It wasn't even necessarily happening 5 years ago on a serious sense. So you might see updates and changes to the requirements that are listed on those type of forms and sheets that suddenly have to start noticing, hey, if you've got PFAS, put it there. And that's also a reasonable approach too. You're also probably going to see a practice being put into place where when you start to purchase new products from a supplier or existing supplier, that you're going to start putting that requirement on that purchase too, to say, listen, we're purchasing this large amount of materials from you. We would like to know what you know about the PFAS using these materials, just so that we can report this and we've got a good sense of this. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So for products that require PFAS right now, there's no suitable replacement. So what is the expectation for those to discontinue the product completely?
It's a great question. And yeah, the question is number one, or the answer to that is when I say the answer, what they want you to do is to say, okay, find a reasonable alternative, do some R&D, have your R&D team. I've talked with some companies that have successfully done this already. It depends on the product, depends on the use of PFAS, where it's being used, what it can do. But yeah, start having your R&D folks, if you have R&D folks, look into alternatives. And some of these alternatives might not be, performance tested. And this is a big concern. You might find an alternative that you think is good and reasonable, that takes care of the issue, but it hasn't necessarily been tested for 2 or 5 or 10 years, when it's being placed in service. And you might see the ramifications of that, and that's not just for, fenestration. That's going to be products all over the place as you start to find these reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable alternatives. The other answer to that is that if you can't find a reasonable alternative, tough luck. The performance of the window or door might not be as long. You might have to replace them longer. They might not have the same characteristics, but we don't care. That's their answer to that. They want you to find reasonable alternatives. But again, as we mentioned before, are reasonable alternatives existing for a lot of these things? Are the reasonable alternatives safer? Is there data to show that they're even safer? Are they even performance tested? There's a lot of these open questions that, again, when you go to lawmakers like in Maine and you say, hey, we should ban these chemicals, and they do it, and then they get these questions like the questions that you're asking right now, and they're having to think about it more seriously rather than just a 3-month rush process. And they're saying, wait a minute, maybe we acted too fast. Maybe we don't have the resources in place to really, to enforce this. Maybe there are not reasonable alternatives for a lot of these PFAS chemicals, and that people and consumers will start to notice these things, and be very upset. All in the guise of, getting rid of cancer. It's not like, I guess too, I don't want to speak presumably, but we could get rid of PFAS and ban it all today, right now, and just get rid of it and do a blanket ban. We are all still going to have PFAS in our blood for the rest of our lives. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it almost feels like all the regulatory efforts being addressed, it's going to take a long time before we see any health benefits start to come back at us for that. Other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for having me here today. My contact information is right here. My email is jcarter@wdma.com. If you've got any questions or follow-ups, you can feel free to reach out to me individually. You can also go through Terry or Stefan. And thank you so much for having me today. I'm really happy to be here, so thank you.